Pour it. I don't care if his truck's parked there. Pour it.
That's what Pam Westbrook told her concrete crew while they buried the end of my driveway under 4 inches of wet cement. I'd just come home from a 2-week survey job up in the mountains, and there it was. A 3-car garage framed across the only road to my own front door. The gap she left wasn't wide enough for my father's wheelchair van. She actually smiled when she saw my face. "Maybe now you'll keep that ugly ramp out of sight," she said. She figured a quiet man with an old truck and a sick dad wouldn't fight back. What she didn't know is that I survey land for a living. That driveway is written into my deed, and she'd already been told by the county she had no right to touch it. So I didn't yell. I pulled out my tape and started measuring. "Where are you watching from? Stick around, because this one ends with a bulldozer. Let me back up, because you need to understand the kind of man I am before you understand what I did to that garage. My name is Garrett Pruitt. I'm 47 years old, and for 22 of those years, I've been a licensed land surveyor in Maury County, Tennessee. It's not glamorous work. Most days it's me, a tripod, and a GPS rover, walking a tree line in August heat thick enough to chew, swatting deer flies while I find the exact spot where one man's land stops and another man's begins. But here's the thing about my job that Pam Westbrook never bothered to ask about. Property lines are my whole life. I know where they hide. I know how to prove them. And I know that a line on the ground is worth more than any woman's opinion, no matter how loud she is. I live at the end of Old Beechcroft Lane, in a little subdivision called Hawthorne Ridge that sits where the suburbs of Spring Hill finally give up and the cattle pasture begins. My lot is what we call a flag lot. The house sits back behind the others, and the only way in is a long gravel drive that runs up the side of the property next door. That drive is mine. It's a recorded ingress-egress easement, written into my deed and the deed of every owner before me, going back to 1986 when the developer first cut these lots. I have the paper. I have the plat. I could draw it from memory. The property that gravel drive runs alongside belongs to Pam Westbrook. If you've ever lived under an HOA, you already know Pam. She'd been president of the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years, which is about 8 years longer than anyone should hold that kind of power. She was a big woman, blonde out of a bottle, the kind who wore a crisp linen blazer over yoga pants to walk her little dog past your house and judge your grass. She drove a pearl-white Escalade she parked sideways across 2 spots at the Kroger. And she carried a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws in her purse like some people carry a Bible. Her husband Roger ran a remodeling crew out of a metal building on the edge of town. Cash jobs mostly. Decks, sunrooms, the occasional garage for folks who didn't want to wait on the county. That detail matters. Hold on to it. Now, I wasn't always the man at the end of the lane. 2 years back, my mother passed, and my father Earl started slipping. Parkinson's. The tremor came first, then the shuffle, then the falls. So, I did what you do. I moved him in with me. I built a ramp off the side porch with my own hands, poured a little turnaround so his van could pull right up to the door, and I widened the gravel drive by 3 feet so the wheelchair lift had room to come down. Earl was a diesel mechanic for 40 years. His hands shook now, but his mind was sharp as a fresh blade, and most evenings we'd sit on that porch listening to the cicadas wind up, while he told me which of his old customers had finally died. I'll be honest with you about why it was just me and him. My marriage didn't survive the year my mother got sick. My ex-wife wanted a different kind of life than a man who spends his weekends walking property lines in the rain. And I don't blame her for it anymore. So when Earl needed somebody, there wasn't a debate. I had a spare room and a steady job and a porch with a good view of the pasture. And a man only gets one father. People in town used to call me quiet. They meant it as a small insult. The truth is, when you spend 20 years standing alone in a field waiting for a satellite to lock so you can pin down where a thing truly is, you learn that the loudest person in any room is almost never the one who's right. You learn to wait. You learn to write things down. You learn that the dirt doesn't care how anybody feels about it. The dirt only cares what's recorded. That patience is the most valuable tool I own, worth more than the $40,000 instrument in the back of my truck. Pam Westbrook would have called me a pushover. She'd have been wrong about that the way she was wrong about everything else. Those evenings on the porch were the best part of my day. The smell of Earl's coffee, gone cold in his shaking hands. the thunk of June bugs against the screen, the sound of his slow voice telling the same 3 stories about engines he had brought back from the dead in 1981. That was the life Pam decided wasn't good enough for her neighborhood. That was the life she tried to wall off behind a slab of concrete. That ramp was the first thing Pam ever sent me a letter about. Unapproved exterior modification visible from the street. A wheelchair ramp for a dying man. I framed that letter. I should have known right then what she was. The morning my whole life changed. I was 400 miles away, on a survey job near the Smokies, with no signal and a transit set up on a ridge. I'd told Earl I'd be home Friday. I didn't know that, while I was gone, Pam Westbrook had decided my driveway would make a real nice spot for her brand new 3-car garage. I came down Old Beechcroft Lane that Friday evening, with the windows down, smelling cut hay and somebody's charcoal grill, feeling good for the first time in weeks. Then, I turned toward my drive, and I hit the brakes so hard the gravel I'd hauled myself sprayed up under the truck. There was a building where my driveway used to be. Not finished, framed, raw lumber standing up against the orange sky, a concrete slab gleaming wet at the edges, and 3 garage door openings gaping like missing teeth. It sat square across the gravel, swallowing the easement whole. Roger's crew was still there, packing tools into a trailer, and standing on her back porch with a glass of something pink in her hand, watching me like she'd been waiting all day for this exact moment, was Pam Westbrook. I got out of the truck slow. My heart was going, but my hands were steady. Surveyor's hands. "Evening, Garrett," she called down, sweet as pie. "Don't pitch a fit. The board approved it." I looked at the slab. I looked at the gap she'd left between the garage corner and the fence, maybe 7 feet. My father's van needs 9. "Pam," I said, "my dad can't get through that." She sipped her drink. "Then maybe it's time he was somewhere with proper care." And she smiled. "This is a community, Garrett. We have standards. That ramp, that van, that truck, it all drags us down. The board agrees. The easement's been reassigned to common use. You'll want to read your bylaws." The crew chief wouldn't look at me. He was a young guy with sawdust in his hair, and he kept his eyes on the trailer hitch like it was the most interesting thing in Tennessee. A cement truck had left ruts in my grandmother's daylilies, the ones she'd planted along that drive before I was born. The orange sky was going purple over the pasture, and somewhere a dog was barking, and the air smelled like fresh-cut lumber and wet concrete, a smell I usually love, the smell of something being built. Not that evening. That evening it smelled like a man boxing in my father, because inside the house behind me, Earl was sitting in a wheelchair. He could no longer roll out his own front door. I could see the blue light of his television flickering in the front window. He didn't even know yet. He thought I was just getting home. He thought we'd sit on the porch like always. "You can't be serious," I said to Pam, keeping my voice flat. "There's no permit for this. There's no setback variance. You can't put a permanent structure across a recorded easement." She waved a manicured hand like she was shooing a fly. "The board voted. That's all the permit a community like ours needs. We take care of our own around here, Garrett. Some of us understand that property values are a shared responsibility." Her eyes flicked to the ramp on the side of my house, then back to me, and her smile got a little colder. "Some of us just take, and never think about how it looks to everybody else." I didn't yell. "I want you to remember that, because it's the whole point." I walked back to my truck, took out the steel tape and the camera I keep in the toolbox, and I started measuring. Pam laughed from her porch. "You do that, honey," she said. "Measure all you want." She had no idea she'd just picked a fight with the one man in Tennessee who measures for a living. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did what calms me down. I pulled my deed. I pulled the recorded plat from 1986. I spread them across the kitchen table under the hanging light while Earl dozed in his chair, and I read every word, slow, the way my old mentor taught me. And the more I read, the calmer I got. Because Pam had made her first mistake before she ever poured a yard of concrete. The easement wasn't HOA property. It never had been. It was a private ingress-egress easement, granted to my parcel specifically, recorded at the County Register of Deeds, Book 412, page 88. No homeowners association in America can reassign a recorded private easement by taking a vote. That's not how property works. That's not how anything works. The HOA had exactly as much authority over my driveway as they had over the surface of the moon. The next morning, I drove to the Maury County Permits Office. I knew most of the clerks by name. When you survey for a living, you live in that building. I asked Carol at the front desk to pull any permits issued for the Westbrook address in the last 90 days. She typed. She frowned. She typed again. "Garrett," she said, "there's nothing. No building permit, no grading permit, no setback variance. Nothing's been filed." I felt something cold and clean settle in my chest. Roger had built that garage the way he built everything. Cash, fast, no paper. No permit meant no inspection. No inspection meant nobody official had ever confirmed that garage was legal to exist, which it wasn't. Here's the first thing worth writing down, the kind of thing that costs people their houses. An HOA vote cannot override a recorded easement or a county permit. The county's authority comes from the state. The HOA's authority comes from a binder in Pam's purse. One of those is real. I had Carol print me the search results, stamped and dated. I had my deed, I had the plat, and I had a garage sitting on my access with no legal right to be there. But I'm a careful man. Being right isn't the same as winning, and I'd seen too many neighbors lose fights they should have won because they got loud before they got ready. So I didn't go knock on Pam's door and wave my paper in her face. Not yet. I went home, and I did the one thing I'm better at than anyone in that subdivision. I surveyed her garage. I set up my total station at the original iron pin in the front corner, the real one, the monument the 1986 surveyor had driven into the dirt, still right where the plat said it would be. I shot the corners of her slab. I shot the easement boundary. I let the math come up on the screen, and when it did, I actually laughed out loud, alone in my own driveway. Pam's garage didn't just block the easement. The northwest corner of that slab crossed the property line and sat 4 feet, 2 inches inside land that was deeded, taxed, and titled to me. Not the easement, my dirt. She had built part of her garage on my actual property. That's when this stopped being a neighbor dispute and became something with my name on the winning side. But I knew Pam. She didn't lose. She escalated. And I was about to find out exactly how far she'd go. Monday morning, before I'd even finished my coffee, I heard the beep of a truck backing up. I came out onto the porch and watched 2 of Roger's men chain a row of limestone boulders across the front of my gravel drive, the part that was still mine, past the garage. Big ones, the kind you need a machine to move. Pam stood in the road in white capris with a clipboard, directing them like a foreman. "What is this?" I asked. "This," she said, tapping the clipboard, "is the HOA restoring common area to its natural state. Your unauthorized gravel expansion is being reversed. There's a fine attached, $400. She held out a sheet of paper. "And the boulders stay until you remove that ramp and that van." My father had a neurologist appointment that Thursday in Nashville. The van now had a garage on one side and a wall of rock on the other. He was, for all practical purposes, sealed inside his own house. I took the fine, I read it. Then I looked at Pam, and I smiled for the first time since I'd come home. "Thank you," I said. It threw her. For what? For putting it in writing. Because here's the second thing worth writing down. When somebody's wronging you, the worst thing you can do is start a shouting match they'll deny later. The best thing you can do is make them document it. Every fine, every letter, every order to her husband's crew. Pam was building my case for me, one signature at a time. I took that fine inside, dated it, and dropped it in a folder that was getting thick. Thursday came. Earl missed his appointment. I had to call the neurologist's office and explain that my father couldn't leave the house because our neighbor had walled in the driveway. The nurse went quiet, then said, "Sir, is he safe? Do we need to call somebody?" And I sat there at my kitchen table, this grown man, with my jaw tight, because the answer was that my dad was trapped, and the woman who trapped him was on her porch drinking sweet tea. That same week, Pam wasn't done. She must have figured the boulders weren't humiliating enough, because 2 days later, I found a fresh sheet of paper stapled to the cedar post at the head of my drive. An official HOA notice of continuing violation. It cited my ramp, my van, my work truck, and, I'm not making this up, the trail camera I'd mounted, which she called unauthorized surveillance equipment creating an atmosphere of hostility. She wanted 4 separate fines, totaling $1,600, and she'd carbon copied the entire board so they'd all feel important about it. Most folks would have torn that notice down and stomped on it. I peeled it off careful as a tax document, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and added it to the folder. Every accusation she made was another sentence in a sworn record that she'd been targeting a disabled man's access to his own home. She thought she was burying me in paper. She was handing me a confession in installments. I did go talk to one board member, a retired school teacher named Glenda Hoyt, who'd always seemed decent. I caught her at her mailbox and asked, plain, whether the board had really voted to build a garage on my easement. She went pale. "Garrett," she said, "there was no vote. Pam sent an email saying it was handled. We thought she meant she'd work something out with you." That was the moment I understood the whole thing was a one-woman operation wearing a committee's clothes. I thanked Glenda and asked if she'd put that in writing someday. She said she would. She did. That was the night Earl said something I've never forgotten. His hands were shaking around his coffee mug, and he said, "Son, you've got that look. Your granddad had it. Don't do anything that lands you in a cell." He set the mug down. "But God help her if you do it right." So I did it right. The next morning I drove to a colleague's office across the county, Ned Caldwell, another licensed surveyor, 20 years older than me and twice as ornery. I didn't want my own survey on this. I wanted a second man's stamp, somebody with no dog in the fight, so that when this reached a courtroom, no lawyer could say I'd cooked the numbers to favor myself. Ned came out, set up his own equipment, shot the corners cold without me telling him what I expected, and came back with the same answer. 4 feet, 2 inches of encroachment onto my deed, plus the entire easement blocked. He sealed his survey with his license number and signed it. "Garrett," he said, peeling off his gloves, "in 30 years, I've never seen one this clean. She built a permanent structure on another man's recorded land with no permit. That's not a gray area. That's a quiet title case with a bow on it." Then I went to a lawyer, not a fancy one, a property attorney named Wade Hollis, who worked out of a converted house off the square, with hunting prints on the wall and a coffee pot older than me. He read my deed. He read the plat. He read Ned's seal survey and Carol's stamped permit search, and my folder full of Pam's signed fines. He took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes. "You're a surveyor," he said. 22 years. Then you already know you've won. The question is how bad you want to win." He leaned back. "We can file for an injunction to stop the construction and a quiet title action to confirm your line. The court can order that garage removed, at her cost. But I want to do something first. I want to pull the county records on her property, because a woman who will build a garage on a man's land without a permit usually isn't doing it for the first time, and she usually didn't think it up alone." That afternoon, Wade's paralegal pulled everything the county had on Pam Westbrook and Hawthorne Ridge: deeds, plats, prior complaints, a stack 3 inches thick. I sat in Wade's cramped little office with the window unit rattling and went through it page by page, because reading records is the one thing I'm slower and more stubborn about than anyone alive. And buried near the bottom, paper clipped to an old zoning request, was a single document that turned this from a case I'd win into a case she'd never recover from. 8 months before she poured that slab, Pam Westbrook had petitioned Maury County to formally vacate my easement, to legally erase my driveway off the records so she could build. And the county had told her no, in writing, a denial letter, signed and stamped, sitting in the public file. Read that again, because it's the whole ballgame. Pam asked the county for permission to take my driveway. The county said no. 8 months later, she built on it anyway. In property law, there's a defense people lean on when they accidentally build over a line. It's called the good faith improver doctrine. If you honestly believe the land was yours, a judge might give you mercy, let you pay for the strip instead of tearing the building down. It's the one card someone like Pam could have played. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe it was an honest mistake. That denial letter set that card on fire. She couldn't claim she thought the easement was hers. She had a signed government document telling her it wasn't. She knew. She petitioned, she got told no, and she bulldozed ahead, pun fully intended. That's not a good faith mistake. In Tennessee, that's willful encroachment. And willful encroachment is the kind of thing that doesn't just lose you the building. It loses you the lawyer's fees, the survey costs, the damages, and any sympathy a judge ever had. Wade actually whistled when he read it. "She handed us the knife," he said, "and she sharpened it first." I drove home that evening with the whole file on the seat beside me, and for the first time since I'd come down that lane and seen those raw studs against the sky, I felt the ground tilt back level under my feet. The cicadas were screaming in the heat. Earl was on the porch, and the boulders still sat across our drive like a wall around a prison. I parked, walked up, and sat down next to him. "Dad," I said, "I need you to be patient a little longer. I'm going to fix this, but I'm going to fix it so it stays fixed." He nodded slow. "How long?" "However long it takes to do it legal. Because anybody can lose their temper and knock a wall down. That's a misdemeanor and a viral video where you're the villain. What I wanted was the right to do it with the law standing behind me, a sheriff watching, and that woman unable to lift one finger to stop it. I wanted it clean. Now came the part of this where I stopped reacting and started building. A trap, if you want to call it that. But every board in it was made of paper she'd signed herself. The plan had 3 legs, and Wade and I set them up, careful as a tripod on soft ground. The first leg was the lawsuit. We filed for quiet title to confirm my deeded line, plus a mandatory injunction. That's a court order that doesn't just tell somebody to stop, it orders them to undo what they've done. We asked the court to declare the garage an unlawful encroachment and order its removal at Pam's expense. We attached Ned's sealed survey, my deed, the 1986 plat, and the recorded easement. Clean and quiet. Pam was served papers on a Tuesday by a process server while she was watering her hydrangeas. Wade told me she threw the envelope in the street. The second leg was the county. Remember, that garage had no permit and no inspection, so I filed a code enforcement complaint. Anybody can, it's your right as a citizen, and you can do it over the phone. A county code officer named Della Briggs came out, a no-nonsense woman in steel-toe boots who'd been red-tagging cowboys like Roger for 15 years. She walked the slab, checked the file on her tablet, and slapped a bright orange stop work order on a stud where the whole street could see it. Unpermitted structure, no further work until it's brought up to code or removed. Roger's crew packed up and didn't come back. Here's the third thing worth writing down, and it's the one that saves regular people the most grief. You don't need to be rich to fight an HOA. You need records. A code enforcement complaint costs nothing. A property records request costs a few dollars. A recorded easement is public, permanent, and stronger than any board vote. The system isn't rigged against the little guy nearly as bad as people think, but it only works if you bring paper instead of yelling. The third leg was witnesses. Because Wade said something that stuck with me, judges decide cases on law, but juries and reputations and county boards, those run on patterns. So in the evenings, I started knocking on doors, quiet, polite, just asking folks about their own dealings with Pam. What I found was a neighborhood full of people who'd been waiting years for somebody to go first. There was Lorraine Sutter, 3 doors down, a widow Pam had fined $600 for a non-conforming handrail her late husband built. There was the Mercer family, who'd been threatened with a lien over the color of their front door. There was an old Marine named Hank who Pam had reported to the county for a flagpole he'd flown the colors on for 30 years. One after another, they told me their stories on their porches in the blue evening light, and one after another, when I told them what she'd done to my dad's driveway, they said the same thing. "What do you need from me?" Lorraine's was the one that stuck with me. She sat me down at her kitchen table, poured sweet tea into a jelly glass, and pulled a shoebox off the top of her refrigerator. Inside were 3 years of Pam's letters, fines, warnings, threats over a handrail her husband Walt had built 6 weeks before his heart gave out. "I couldn't take it down," she told me, her voice steady but her eyes wet. "It's the last thing he made, so I paid her. $600 just to keep a piece of my husband." She slid the box across the table. "You take these. You do what I couldn't." I have never in my life wanted to win something as bad as I wanted to win for Lorraine Sutter at that table. Hank just stood on his porch with his arms crossed and listened to the whole story without a word. When I finished, he stepped inside, came back out with a folded flag in a triangle case, and set it on the rail. "My boy carried that flag's twin in Fallujah," he said, "and she fined me $400 for flying it too tall. You tell that lawyer of yours I'll sign anything he wants, and I'll say it to her face in any courtroom in this state. I needed affidavits, signed, dated, sworn statements." Wade collected 11 of them, 11 neighbors on the record, describing 9 years of a woman using a homeowners association like a personal weapon. None of it was the law. All of it was the pattern. And while I built, I documented everything. I'd mounted a weatherproof trail camera on the cedar at the corner of my property, the kind hunters use, pointed straight at the easement and her garage. Motion activated, time stamped, the footage backed up to my phone. If anybody so much as breathed on my survey stakes, I'd have it in color, which turned out to matter more than I could have guessed. Because Pam Westbrook was not a woman who lost quietly. The boulders came first. Then, when the lawsuit landed, she switched from bully to victim overnight. She sent a mass email to the whole subdivision. I have a copy, naturally, claiming that a disgruntled resident was harassing the board with frivolous litigation, and that everyone's dues might have to go up to cover legal defense of our community standards. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me by reaching into their wallets. It backfired beautifully. Half those people had already signed affidavits against her. Lorraine Sutter printed that email out, drove to Pam's house, and left it under her windshield wiper, with one word written across it in red marker. No. So Pam went lower. She filed a complaint against my surveyor's license with the state board, claiming I'd performed a fraudulent self-serving survey to steal her land. It was nonsense. I hadn't even done the survey that mattered, Ned had, sealed and independent. But she didn't know that, because she'd never once asked a single real question about how any of this worked. The state board reviewed it, saw 2 sealed surveys that agreed to the inch, and dismissed it in a week. All she'd done was put her own bad faith on another government record. When the smear didn't work and the licensing complaint blew up in her face, Pam tried sugar. She showed up at my door one evening with a foil-covered plate of brownies and a checkbook, of all things. She'd done her hair. She stood on my porch, the porch she'd tried to wall off, and offered me $5,000 to make all the unpleasantness go away, like the garage on my land was a misunderstanding we could settle over dessert. I told her my lawyer handled my correspondence now, and that she was welcome to mail him the brownies. She stood there a second with her mouth working, then turned and walked off, and I heard the plate hit the bottom of my trash can at the curb on her way past. The next morning, a rumor was going around the subdivision that I was being investigated for fraud and was about to lose my surveyor's license. Pam had been busy on the neighborhood Facebook group at midnight. The trouble for her was that everybody on Old Beechcroft Lane had already seen the orange stop work order stapled to her own garage, and most of them had already signed a sworn statement about her in my lawyer's office. The rumor died before lunch. Lorraine Sutter posted a single comment under Pam's lie, a photo of the county denial letter, which was public record, with the caption, "Ask her about this one." 40-some neighbors liked it. Pam deleted the whole thread by dinner. Then she made the mistake that ended her. One morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the trail cam feed, and there was Roger Westbrook in the gray light before 6, crouched at my front property corner with a sledgehammer. He swung it 3 times and knocked my iron survey pin clean out of the ground, the original 1986 monument, then chucked it into the brush and kicked dirt over the hole. Pam stood right behind him in her bathrobe, pointing at the spot, telling him where to hit. The camera got all of it, her face, her finger, the time, the date. I sat down at my kitchen table and let out a long breath because I knew something Pam and Roger didn't. In the state of Tennessee, knowingly destroying or removing a land survey monument is a crime. It's right there in the code. Those iron pins aren't just markers, they're legal evidence of a boundary, protected by law, and disturbing one on purpose can be charged as a misdemeanor with real teeth, plus civil liability for every dollar it costs to replace it. People think a survey stake is just a stick in the ground. It's not. It's a witness. And they just assaulted one on camera. Here's the 4th thing worth writing down. Tampering with a survey monument is a crime in nearly every state because that little iron pin is the legal anchor for every boundary around it. Knock one out, and you're not winning an argument. You're committing an offense and handing the other side a felony-flavored gift on a time-stamped platter. I didn't even get angry. I forwarded the footage to Wade and to Deputy Sorensen at the sheriff's office, who I'd gone to high school with. Wade added it to our filing as evidence of willful, knowing interference. Sorensen opened a separate case, and I reset the monument with Ned present as a witness, sealed and re-recorded, stronger than before. Pam had now, in writing and on camera, blocked a recorded easement, built without a permit, ignored a county denial, filed a false licensing complaint, and destroyed protected survey evidence. My lawyer stopped calling it a case. He started calling it a collection. The week before the hearing, a dozen neighbors came and sat on my porch on a warm evening, and I laid the whole thing out for them in plain English, because most folks have no idea how any of this actually works. I told them an easement isn't a favor the neighborhood grants you. It's a property right, recorded at the county, that travels with the land forever, and no board vote can erase it. I told them the difference between an HOA rule and the law is the difference between a house rule at a poker game and the United States Constitution. One of them is binding on the planet. The other is binding only as long as everybody agrees to keep playing. I told them a mandatory injunction is a judge ordering somebody to undo a wrong, not just stop it, and that when a court rules in your favor on a property line, it can put a lien on the loser's house so they can't sell or refinance until they pay you every dollar. I watched their faces change as they realized the system they had always thought was stacked against them was actually sitting there, waiting for somebody to use it correctly. Hank raised his hand like he was in school. "So all those years she had us scared," he said. "We could have just filed paper?" "That's the whole trick," I told him. "She counted on you not knowing that. People like Pam don't have real power. They have your silence. The second you bring records instead of arguments, the silence breaks. And so do they." Glenda Hoyt, the school teacher, cried a little. Lorraine just nodded, slow, like a woman finally setting down something heavy she'd carried for years. By the time they left that porch, I didn't have 11 scared neighbors anymore. I had 11 witnesses who couldn't wait for their turn to tell the truth out loud. The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in September, in the old limestone courthouse on the Columbia Square, before Judge Harold Whitcomb, a man who'd been ruling on property in that county for 30 years and had no patience left for anybody who wasted his time. Pam showed up in a Navy suit with a lawyer she'd hired from Nashville, the kind with a watch worth more than my truck. She still thought she was going to win. I could see it in the way she sat, chin up, like the room belonged to her the way she thought the neighborhood did. Then Wade laid it out piece by piece, and I watched the chin come down. He started with the deed and the recorded easement, book 412, page 88. Older than Pam's ownership, plain as daylight. He put up Ned's sealed survey beside my own, identical to the inch, 2 independent licensed professionals agreeing she'd built 4 feet 2 inches onto my deeded land. He entered Carol's stamped permit search. No building permit, no grading permit, nothing. Della Briggs testified to the stop work order. And then, when Pam's Nashville lawyer stood up to argue good faith mistake, that his client had honestly believed the easement was common area, Wade slid the county's denial letter across the table. You could have heard a pin drop in that limestone room. Judge Whitcomb read it twice. He looked over his glasses at Pam. "Mrs. Westbrook," he said, "you petitioned this county to vacate this easement. This county denied you, in writing, and then you built on it anyway." He set the letter down. "There is no good faith here. There is only a woman who didn't like the answer she got." Her lawyer tried to talk. The judge held up one hand. Then Wade played the trail cam footage. The whole courtroom watched Roger swing that sledgehammer in the gray dawn, while Pam, in her bathrobe, pointed at the pin. When her own voice came through the speaker saying, "Right there, hit it right there," she actually flinched in her seat. Judge Whitcomb ruled from the bench. He didn't even recess. He quieted title in my favor, confirmed my easement and my deeded line, declared the garage a willful, unpermitted encroachment, and ordered it removed in full within 30 days, at Pam Westbrook's sole expense. He awarded my survey costs, my attorney's fees, and damages for the time my father was denied access to his own home. And he referred the monument tampering footage to the district attorney. Outside on the courthouse steps in the September sun, Pam grabbed my sleeve. The Polish was gone. "Please," she said, "do you know what it'll cost me to tear that down?" I gently took my arm back. "About 4 feet, 2 inches less than it cost you to build it on my land," I said. And I walked to my truck. She had 30 days to remove it. On day 31, she hadn't touched it. Out of spite, out of money trouble, I never knew which. So the court's order kicked to its next clause. If she failed to remove it, I was authorized to remove it myself and bill her for every dollar. I'd already lined up the contractor. I'd already pulled my own demolition permit, by the book, stamped, legal. And on a bright Saturday morning in October, with the maples turning gold along Old Beechcroft Lane, a lowboy trailer rolled up and unloaded a 30-ton excavator with a hydraulic thumb. Word had gotten around. It always does. By 9 that morning, half of Hawthorne Ridge was standing along the road with coffee cups. Lorraine Sutter brought a lawn chair. Hank the Marine brought a flag. Deputy Sorensen parked his cruiser at the curb, not to stop anything, to keep the peace and, I think, to watch. And somebody had tipped the Columbia paper because a young reporter stood at the edge of the grass with a camera around her neck. The morning was cool enough to see your breath, and the whole lane smelled like fallen leaves and diesel as the excavator's engine turned over with a low, patient rumble. Frost still sat in the shadows along the fence line. Somewhere down the street, a screen door banged, and a kid on a bicycle stopped at the edge of the crowd to watch with his mouth open. There's a particular hush that settles over a place right before something big happens, and old Beechcroft Lane had it that morning, thick as the cold air. Pam came out onto her back porch in her bathrobe, the same porch she'd stood on the evening she told me my father should be somewhere with proper care. She had a phone in her hand, and she was screaming into it. Her lawyer, the HOA, somebody. Nobody was coming. Her Nashville attorney had withdrawn the week before, the way they do when the bills stop getting paid and the case is already lost. Roger's truck wasn't in the driveway. Word around town was that the unpermitted work and the survey pin charge had finally given him a reason to be somewhere else. The board she'd ruled for 9 years wouldn't return her calls. For the first time, the woman who'd controlled the whole neighborhood couldn't get a single person on the line. The operator looked at me. I had the court order in a folder, the deputy at the curb, and my father beside me in his wheelchair, parked at the bottom of the new ramp where he could see everything. Earl reached up and squeezed my hand, and his was steady for once. "Do it right, son," he said. I nodded at the operator. The excavator's arm swung up, that hydraulic thumb opened like a hawk's claw, and it bit into the corner of the garage, the exact corner, 4 feet 2 inches, that sat on my land. The first pull tore the siding off in a long, screaming sheet. The second brought down a wall. Pam's special order carriage house doors, the ones she'd bragged about, folded like cardboard. The framing Roger threw up without a permit came apart like kindling, and the whole thing sagged, groaned, and dropped into a cloud of dust and splinters that drifted across the gravel and settled on the morning like snow. The operator worked it methodically, the way I work a survey. No rush, no showing off, just steady and exact. He peeled the roof back and set it aside. He pulled the studs down in sections. Each time the arm reached in, it took another piece of the thing Pam had built to humiliate my father, and each time it set that piece down, it landed a little softer than her words had. The diesel growled low and steady. The hydraulics hissed and groaned with every pull. Splinters of her special order carriage doors lay scattered across the gravel like broken promises. And when the frame was gone and only the slab remained, the operator swung the breaker over the northwest corner, my 4 feet 2 inches, and drove it down with a crack that echoed off the houses like a gavel coming down a second time. The neighbors didn't cheer. It was better than that. They just watched, quiet and satisfied, the way you watch something that should have happened a long time ago finally happen. A few of them had tears in their eyes, and they weren't for the garage. Lorraine reached over from her lawn chair and squeezed Earl's shoulder. Hank stood at parade rest with his flag, the way he must have stood 100 times for things that mattered. The young reporter's camera clicked and clicked. Pam stopped screaming. She just stood on her porch and watched her monument to petty power come down board by board, on her dime, by court order, with a sheriff at the curb and the whole neighborhood as witness. There was nothing left for her to control. For the first time in 9 years, Pam Westbrook had no authority over anything, and everyone on Old Beechcroft Lane could see it. When the last wall came down and the excavator set the slab breaker against the concrete corner on my property, I walked over to where Pam stood at the edge of her grass. "You could have just asked," I said. "I survey land for a living. I'd have shown you exactly where your line was for free." I looked at the rubble. "Instead, you built your whole reputation on a corner that was never yours." That was the last thing I ever said to her. The garage came down in a single morning. Hauling the debris and breaking out the concrete on my deeded strip took 2 more days. All billed to Pam, all paid eventually when the court put a lien on her property and she had no choice. We regraded the easement, and this time I didn't just restore my driveway. I paved it. A smooth, wide ribbon of asphalt, 12 feet across, with a proper turnaround at the top, gentle enough that Earl could roll his own chair from the van to the ramp without a soul to help him. The first time he did it himself, the afternoon the asphalt cured, he got to the top, turned around, and just sat there in the sun with his eyes closed. Pam resigned as HOA president before the DA even filed the monument charge. The neighbors didn't wait for her to come back either. Lorraine Sutter, The widow she'd fined for a handrail ran for the board and won in a landslide. The first thing the new board did was rewrite the bylaws. No fines without a hearing, no architectural rule that conflicts with state or federal accessibility law, and a flat ban on the board ever touching a recorded easement again. They named that last clause the Pruitt Rule. I didn't ask them to. I about cried when I heard. But here's the part I'm proudest of. All those affidavits, all those neighbors who'd been quietly bullied for years. Once they found out they could fight back, they didn't want to stop at saving themselves. So we started something. The old Beechcroft Accessibility Fund. Every fall now, the whole neighborhood throws a chili cook-off and a silent auction down at the end of my new driveway, right where the garage used to stand, and every dollar goes to building wheelchair ramps for elderly folks in Maury County who can't afford one. Hank the Marine runs the grill, Lorraine runs the auction. Last year we built 9 ramps. My father cut the ribbon on the first one. His hands shook on the scissors, and Lorraine steadied them, and the whole crowd waited as long as it took. Earl passed this past spring, peaceful, in the house at the end of the lane, having rolled in and out his own front door every single day until the end. The last fund we built a ramp for, the family asked if they could put a little brass plate on it. It says, "In memory of Earl Pruitt, who got home." So, that's the story of the garage Pam Westbrook built on my driveway, and the morning I tore it down while she watched from her porch. People ask if I feel bad about it. I don't. I never raised my voice. I never broke a law. I never touched her. I just measured and waited, and let a woman who mistook a binder of bylaws for actual power build her own downfall 4 feet and 2 inches onto land that was always, provably mine. If you've ever had a Pam in your life, somebody with a clipboard and a chip on their shoulder who thought the rules only run one direction, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if watching this one come down felt as good to you as living it felt to me, do me a favor and subscribe, because next week I've got a story about an HOA that tried to charge a Gold Star widow a fine for the flag on her own porch, and the colonel who showed up to her hearing.
Here's what I want you to take from Garrett's story, because it isn't really about a Garrett. Pam Westbrook didn't lose because she was cruel, though she was. She lost because she mistook noise for power. She had a binder of bylaws and a loud voice, and she thought that was the same as the law. It wasn't even close. Garrett beat her with 3 quiet things: a recorded deed, a sealed survey, and a folder full of paper she signed herself. He never raised his voice. He never broke a rule. He just refused to be rushed and let her document her own bad fate one file at a time. That's the lesson. When petty authorities come after you, don't mask their volume, mask their paper trail and beat it. Recourse outlive tempers every single time, and look what grew out of it. A whole neighborhood that stopped being afraid and funds still building ramps for folks who need them. That's what winning the right way looks like. If a Pam ever bulldozed her way into your life, tell me below. Subscribe so you don't miss the Gold Star widow and the colonel next week. You want to see that hearing.